Hello and welcome to Crowdoscope's podcast series on collective intelligence. Today, we are joined by Thomas Malone, who is Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management and the founding director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. He's the author of the forthcoming book, Superminds, The Surprising Power of People and Computers Thinking Together, which is actually published today, 15th of May 2018. So Thomas, hi, thanks for joining us today. So how did you get into the field of collective intelligence? What made you interested in the first place?
Started when I was in high school, and I was the president of the student council in my school. And I was looking not too long ago at some of the notes. I was really interested, even those many years ago, in how things were organized, how groups of people were organized. And I think that interest has kind of underlay much of my work and interests ever since. More specifically, I think the field of collective intelligence was really catalyzed in my mind, or at least my interest in that field, in a dinner I had with Esther Dyson, who's a well-known computer industry analyst and now investor, and Werner Vinge, who's an award-winning science fiction author, who, among other things, essentially coined the concept of the technological singularity as we know it now. So I had dinner with the two of them in about 2005, and I remember that by the end of the dinner, I had the feeling not that I had decided what was going to be my next topic. This was right after the publication of my last book, The Future of Work. I didn't have the feeling that I had decided what would be next, what I would do next, but that I had finally admitted to myself what I would do next. So in some sense, I felt like I had known all along that what I should be doing next was this topic that in that dinner we called superhuman intelligence. But what I later realized a better name for it would be collective intelligence. And even later than that, I came to believe that a better name still would be Superminds. That's the title I used for my new book coming out on May 15th. And I think that name is in some sense a simple and I think evocative term for what many of us mean by the phrase collective intelligence.
Great. So that would actually lead me to my next questions. You just mentioned that you're publishing your new book. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book and what readers can expect from it?
So, Superminds, the surprising power of people and computers thinking together. So I think there are two main messages in this book. The first message is that there are all around us in the world today entities that are intelligent, that are even in some sense artificially intelligent, but that we usually don't think of that way. These entities are what I would call superminds. By superminds, I mean groups of people and also often of computers that are working together in ways that seem intelligent. Now, that's a very broad definition of superminds and a very broad definition of collective intelligence in the sense that I believe collective intelligence is the property that these superminds have. And by that definition, our world is full of superminds, and they've been around for a very long time. So companies, countries, families, markets, communities, these are all examples of what I would consider superminds. And in fact, if you think about it, I believe almost everything we humans have ever accomplished, from inventing language to making a turkey sandwich, almost all of those accomplishments have been made not by single individuals, but by groups of people, that is, by superminds. So that's the first point, and I think the implication of that is that to the degree we can understand better how these superminds work and how to use them, we can do much better at solving our problems and getting what we want. The main message or theme of the book is that computers are about to become much more important part of these superminds, and they will enable us to create much more intelligent superminds than was ever possible before. So a key application of this second theme, or I guess you could say of the combination of the two themes, is that many people today are talking about artificial intelligence and computers as essentially competition for humans. So they're talking about computers versus people. But I think a far more productive way of thinking about this is not computers versus people, but computers and people. In other words, I don't think it'll be a competition between people and computers and you have to choose one. I think most of the things we do in the future, at least if you use a large enough perspective, will be done by combinations of people and computers, which you could call superminds. In other words, I think these superminds will increasingly come to include computers rather than being, in some sense, replaced by computers. And because these superminds, both by doing some of the intelligent work themselves, but I think in many cases, more importantly, by helping to link humans, in other words, helping humans, I think by doing those two things, these computers will make our superminds smarter than ever before and better able to solve. So that's the very high-level summary of the two key themes in the book. Go in further detail if you'd like to do that.
So yes, indeed, we would love to have more details, especially business-related examples if you have any, because our audience is mainly business people. So do you have anything to share how our audience could implement collective intelligence in their day-to-day job?
Yeah, so let me give two examples that are not examples of how people in business today are using new kinds of collective intelligence, but these are examples of how collective intelligence is being or could be used in other situations, and I think they have some very intriguing implications for how collective intelligence could be used in new ways in business. First example I'd like to give is of something called liquid democracy. Now, I think that some of your listeners in Europe may be a little more familiar with this than most American listeners are, but the idea of liquid democracy is to explain it, you need to understand two other basic kinds of democracy, which is, on the one hand, you can have a direct democracy, where every voter can vote directly on every question, as was done in ancient Greece, for instance. On the other hand, you could have a representative democracy, which is what's used in most modern democratically governed countries, where the voters vote for representatives who then vote on behalf of those voters on all the issues that need to be decided, often for a number of years between elections. So what liquid democracy is essentially a combination of those two possibilities, but in a much more flexible way. In a liquid democracy, as a voter, you can, if you want, vote directly on every issue you want to. But you can also delegate your right to vote to someone else. It doesn't, however, have to be someone who's elected as a representative for lots and lots of other people. You can delegate your voting right to anyone you want to. It could be a friend of yours, it could be some expert you trust, it could be all kinds of different people. And each of those people can also, in turn, delegate the right to vote on to more. And you can even do these things on an issue-by-issue or category-by-category basis. For instance, I might give one person the right to vote on my behalf on military issues and someone else the right to vote on my behalf on healthcare-related issues. So what that means is that people can vote, can spend as much time as they want, voting in as much detail as they want, but they don't have to spend any more time they want to, because they can always delegate some or all of their voting rights to other people. And I believe that makes democracies far responsive than these, and also it gives them the potential to capitalize on much more of the knowledge and expertise of people in a community, not just the individual voters or the elected representatives. Now, this way of voting on a small scale in a number of European countries, often with what are called pirate parties, where representatives campaign for parliament, pledging that they will vote however the online liquid democracy tells them to. And there have been a number of candidates elected that way in European countries, including Germany and others. There was even for a brief in Iceland, the pirate party there was the most popular party in the country. And this approach has been used in businesses as well. Google, for instance, has experimented on a small scale with using a kind of liquid democracy like this for making some fairly low-level business decisions, like what logos to use for internal projects and what food to serve in the Google kitchens. But I think this approach, which has been used fairly in limited ways so far, has the potential to be a very powerful way of invigorating democracies, not only in governance of countries, but also in businesses. So that's one example that I think has the potential to be used much more widely than it is. Another example that I want to talk about is a way of involving far more people in making decisions and in generating alternatives about what can be done, in some sense developing plans. So we've explored this approach so far in a project called Climate Collab, where we're essentially crowdsourcing the problem of what to do about global climate change. We've created an online website called Climate Collab and an online community of over 100,000 people, including some of the world's leading experts on climate change, but also business people, scientists, students, policymakers, and many others from literally all over the world. And these people are together developing and evaluating proposals for what to do about different aspects of the climate change problem. Now, that's a way of using a new kind of collective intelligence, a particular kind of crowdsourcing in this case, to help solve what you might think of as a global societal problem, what to do about climate change. But I think a similar approach can be used in many other cases for many other kinds of problems, like designing new products for a company, or perhaps even more interestingly, creating strategic plans for a very large company. In my book, for instance, I talk about a scenario about how a large corporation could use an approach like this to involve far more people in their strategic planning process. Instead of just a few senior executives and perhaps some outside consultants, you could potentially let everyone in a company be involved in helping to develop strategic plans. For instance, people at a very low level might come up with pretty innovative ideas for new kinds of products or services that a company could offer. Recent college graduates, millennials, might come up with radical new ideas about how to use technology and cell phones and things like that, for instance, smartphones for doing new products that could be customized, for example. And then different people could combine or generate many possible ideas for new products and services. Other people could compete to combine those ideas in the best ways for at a business unit level, and then still others could compete for how to combine business unit plans in the best way at the level of the corporation as a whole. And you could involve many people not only in generating those ideas, but in evaluating those ideas. And I think that has huge potential for harnessing the collective intelligence of the people in a company in a much more effective way and to a much greater degree than we are often able to do today. So those are at least a couple of examples.
So thank you very much. That sounds very, very interesting indeed. And I think what companies struggle with at the moment is just getting to grips with all technology available on the market, and to try and engage with all of their employees and get their insights for business making. But definitely great insights. Thank you so much. And then my next question, you do say in your abstract that the book articulates a bold picture of the future. So what does the future of collective intelligence hold for us?
Well, what I hope the future of collective intelligence holds is more and more synergistic combinations of people and computers. I think people who are working in some parts of this field already understand how computers can be used to connect humans more closely to each other. And I think that alone will have a huge impact on what we humans can do. In fact, many people today think that the most important way computers will be used is with artificial intelligence. But I think if you look at how computers are used today, the vast majority of uses of computers, the internet, the World Wide Web, email, word processing, Facebook, Google, these are all examples of using computers not to do particularly intelligent things themselves in most cases, but just to connect humans to each other. So I think that's true to a degree very few people seem to even realize today. And I think it's likely to be true for quite some time in the future. But I think it will also be the case that computers will become and do some of what we might call intelligent processing as well. And one of the things I hope is that we can move from an approach that's very common in the field of artificial intelligence, of saying, how can we make computers that are as smart as people, or perhaps someday even smarter than people, move away from that approach toward an approach that says, how can we make people and computers together smarter than anything that has ever existed before? Of course, these things are not completely mutually exclusive, but I think it's a shift in perspective. And I think to the degree you start saying, if something's really hard to do with computers but easy to do with people, how can we make the partnership or the combination between people and computers so effective that it's better than anything we could ever do before? So I think that in some sense, instead of drawing two circles, one around the human and one around the machine, and trying to talk about which is better, we should draw one circle around the computer and the human and the machine together, and figure out how to make that combination as good as possible.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting to talk to you and learn more about your work and your book. I'm really excited for you that this is coming out so soon. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think the one last thought I'd like to leave your listeners with is that I think it's pretty much inevitable that these new kinds of collective intelligence, these new superminds, will create more intelligent organizations, more intelligent groups of people. But I think if we look even further into the future, all the kinds of electronic communication and artificially intelligent computers on our planet, it will become increasingly useful to view all the people and computers on our planet as part of a single global mind. And I think that our future as a species may depend on how well we're able to use our global collective intelligence to make choices that are not just smart, but also wise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas Malone. It was a real privilege talking to you. This was a podcast by Crowdoscope. If you'd like to know more about us or this podcast series, please get in touch and send us an email to hello@crowdoscope.com.